You're listening to episode 131 of Present Moment. Welcome to Present Moment, Mindfulness, Practice, and Science. I'm Ted Meissner. Present Moment is a podcast with interviews, conversations, and roundtable discussions. We speak with mindfulness teachers about their newest findings published in peer-reviewed science journals, teachers about their understanding and methods as they work with students of mindfulness, authors about their books and interests, and we also speak with everyday practitioners. The website presentmomentmindfulness.com has show notes for each episode along with resource materials. Yancy Lael joins us to speak about the mindful way to observe owls. If you're listening to this podcast and find value and insights from what is shared here, know that this is made available from your generosity and the generosity of others like you. I want to thank those of you who are making monthly donations to keep this podcast going. And if you're not yet, please take a moment, go to presentmomentmindfulness.com and click on Make a Donation. One-time or especially monthly donations show that you value this work, which can't happen without you. Thank you for your help, your support, and your kind generosity. Outside in the woods, I feel most strongly a connection with the environment. Whether sitting or walking, the experience of being outdoors in nature dismantles the illusion of separation, and for a time, I belong. My dad taught me and my brothers that when we would go looking for deer. Never hunting for anything but the magical joy of seeing them, and especially when we watched birds. I share a particular moment from my childhood in our conversation with today's guest. Yancy Lael is a writer, educator, and artist. She has a master's degree in teaching and is passionate about the power of storytelling as a path to self-realization. When she's not writing, you can usually find her out in the woods, hanging out with the local owls. Our guest today is Yancy Lael. Yancy, welcome to the podcast. Very glad to have you here.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to this conversation. And for those who are listening, Yancy had reached out to me in an email with what may have felt like a bit of a long shot topic, but as it turns out, I'm really, really delighted to be having this conversation. So why don't you tell us a bit about your background and then we'll dive into our subject.
Sure. So I've been a writer for many years, kind of went off on a tangent for a while and got into teaching. So I was a teacher for over 10 years. Before that, I was an assistant. So I was in education for quite a long time and always looking for interesting activities with children and how to get them inspired about writing and nature, my two favorite subjects. And then I kind of started moving into a alternative education path. I'm just kind of feeling a little penned in by the classroom and, curriculum and all of that. So the last 4 years, I ran our local chapter of the Youth Conservation Corps and got to actually spend some time outdoors and working with kids and showing them how amazing nature is. And that has been a great experience. And then since then, I've gotten back into writing and doing some freelance work.
Great. Thank you for that. And also part of what we'll be talking today is about mindfulness. And I'm curious when that interest first touched your life. What was that like?
I kind of had a unique situation. My uncle was very interested in religious practices and mindfulness and that sort of thing. And it wasn't really, I grew up in LA and it wasn't really that big of a thing in, the bigger culture that I was in. But with my uncle, he was always coming over. Even when I was a little kid, I can remember him saying, let's get still for a minute and think about this. or let's really touch in. Maybe we need to sit quietly for a minute. And he did a lot of meditation practices and alternative. That I don't know if that's alternative, but practices that weren't really in the mainstream for us at the time.
Right, right.
And so I had a mentor in that for many years. Unfortunately, he passed away when I was 19, but I kind of continued along that path of looking into those practices. I wouldn't say that I ascribe to a particular religion because I love religious studies so much.
Mm-hmm.
And so I got into Buddhism a lot as a teenager. And that's really when I started learning about meditation and mindfulness and that sort of thing. And always kind of followed that path throughout my life. There were times when I find myself getting really pulled away by the chaos of, life and all of that, and realizing, oh, wait a minute, I really need to find something that I can pin my attention to and get back into presence. And there were many different practices that I used to do that. Some of it was, literal meditation, but a lot of times it was trying to really be present in what I was doing that I really enjoyed, like writing. That's why I loved writing so much, because it really helped me remember who I am and where I am, really get present with that. That's why I love nature. I mean, you cannot not be present in nature,
Right. So I'm very curious as we get into this, and you and I were chatting a little bit before we started recording about where your interest in bird watching came from. And we'll kind of get into how that really relates to mindfulness, but how did that first start for you?
It's funny because I never suspected that this would be a path that I would take. I've always loved nature, but it was more of a general kind of thing where I just like to be outdoors and go hiking. And it wasn't anything really no specific goal attached to it or anything other than just, like I said, being mindful, being out there, connecting with the natural world and all of that. But in 2014, I was going through a big breakup, and I really needed to be very conscious about keeping that habit of going outside every day and spending some time in nature. And so on the weekends, I'm very lucky. My mom lives nearby and has a big 40-acre ranch. So on the weekends, I would go to her place and walk in circles around the back pasture. And I kept startling an owl back there. Like there was a big owl in the juniper tree, and it didn't really process for me for a couple of weeks. And then I think maybe the third week, I thought, every time I walk by this tree, there's an owl in it. And I keep accidentally scaring it away because I'm not paying attention. And so for one thing, it brought me back to the present moment of I need to be paying attention to my surroundings. And, what are these treasures that are all around me that I'm not even noticing right now because I'm, in my head about this, studying personal situation. The whole point is to be out here and to notice things and to be here. And so I had this crazy idea of what if I could actually come out here and intentionally meet this owl and actually see it, maybe even take a picture of it. That was kind of a stretch goal, but I thought, okay, it could happen. And so the next week I went out with a pair of binoculars and the camera, and it was very, very careful and quiet. I mean, I knew it would hear me long before I knew it was there. They can hear so well. But I just thought if I move carefully and quietly, maybe I'll be able to see it through the binoculars. So I got to the edge of the field and lifted up the binoculars. And right away, I was face to face with it. It was looking right at me. I mean, it was quite a ways away, like maybe half a football field or something. And I couldn't believe it. And so I started taking very careful steps toward it. And again, this is where it really connected for me. Just in that very first time was I had to notice everything I was doing, like every feeling of my foot against we have really volcanic sand out here in Central Oregon. So every feeling of my foot against the sand, and was I going to step on a sagebrush and make a crinkling sound? Was I stepping into a little place where my foot might scoot over, or any sound or anything that I made, I knew might scare it away. So I had to be so careful and so present. And I kept kind of creeping forward, and I still was quite a ways away from it, but I sure enough got my picture of the owl, and I was completely hooked at that point. It was just an incredible experience.
So I'm personally curious, and for those who are listening, a few of you know I've been an avid bird watcher since I was small. It's something that my brothers and I inherited from our dad. I'm curious what kind of owl it was.
It was a great horned owl. We have a lot of those in this area. Very common.
Great and a wonderful introduction, and actually one of my favorite owls too. And actually, I'll share, if my brothers who don't listen to this podcast happen to be listening to this podcast, they'll remember this story. When I was little, and we were out driving in the car at our family cabin in Wisconsin we've had since our grandfather's time. And my dad was driving. My brothers were in the car, and it was evening. And we got to this one turnoff on these back roads leading back to the cabin, where there's a sign for the public landing, where people put in their boats and go fishing, whatever. And there was in this evening time a great horned owl sitting on the sign, which my dad realized, of course, made perfect sense because it's a public landing. He just interpreted landing a little bit differently. And that was a wonderfully magical moment for me. And ever since that time, great horned owls in particular have been near and dear to my heart. And so I know we'll geek out for a little bit. So to the mindfulness crowd who's listening to this, I'll apologize and suggest, boy, this is kind of fun. So check into it as well. Yancy, what happened then? After that, you had that experience and you really drew yourself into the moment with the help of your friendly neighborhood great horned owl. Mm-hmm. How did this grow for you? What happened next?
Well, I definitely wanted to continue the experience of it. And part of it was that feeling of connection, just to connect with a wild animal like that is such an amazing feeling. And to let it, or to know that it's letting you approach it like that. I mean, it's just amazing feeling. But also for some reason, that awareness of like my body in space and time was so comforting to me. I mean, and that's really the point of mindfulness. It just really made me want to explore that more and realize how out of my body and out of my mind that I tend to be, just so distracted with other things. So that was a real wake-up call in a sense too. I really wanted to keep pursuing that. And over the course of the next 2 or 3 years, I would say, I continued to do that. I didn't get a whole lot of experiences like that on a regular basis, but I was able to find an owl from time to time and in the same area and continue to have those encounters and to be really mindful. But things really started to shift in 2017 when a mating pair of great horned owls actually built their nest on my mom's property, and they had 3 babies. And that was just, as you can imagine, that really changed a lot of things. I can remember my mom sent me a picture of this super fluffy, tiny little white bird. I said, what on earth is that? And then I realized, oh my gosh, it's a baby owl. And it was sitting on her fence, like right outside her house. And
oh, wow.
So that weekend I came over and I started watching them, and I'm trying to debate how much I want to get into being careful about, because you want to be respectful of owls and their space and that they're wild animals and be safe and all of that. So let's just say all of that's important, but
and
right. And then to go on with the story, I took every opportunity that I could on the weekends to go visit and watch them. So right before dusk, they would come out and the babies would start flying trying to fly. Mm-hmm. So I'd just sit there and watch for hours as they were just stumbling. I mean, literally stumbling and falling into trees and climbing onto roofs and falling off the roofs. I mean, it was just the sweetest thing. But it was just this opportunity for me to just be there. I wasn't thinking about anything else. It was just sitting there and watching them and feeling that connection with them. And also, to be honest, it was pretty inspiring too, to think about how they just flung themselves into the air and made me want to do that as well. Like, okay, maybe I need to take some more risks in my life. So, all of these things make you think of other ways that you can live your life and try new things. I watched them that whole summer. And a lot of that was, again, being very careful. Like as they grew older, they were not as open to being watched. So you have to be careful. Like this is the thing that's different from bird watching versus, I call it species specific observation. It doesn't have to be, a type of bird. If you happen to be into badgers or, coyotes or whatever, you're really not sitting there. Like bird watching can be considered a very passive activity where you put up a bird feeder and sit out that fire window and watch them. It does
backyard bird watching.
Yep. Right. I mean, that's not necessarily all that bird watching is or could be, but when you're talking about like species specific observation, you are the one, like you're going out there actively and pursuing them. And I don't mean that in a predatory sense. You're just looking for the experience. So for me, that meant going out, like I said, making that effort and going out and looking for clues to where they have been. Again, just bringing you so much into the present moment. So I'd walk along certain paths that I know that they frequented, and I'd find their feathers. When they're babies, they're dropping juvenile feathers everywhere. So, you look at the feathers and you start to pay attention to when they appeared and what was there, a week ago, and how often do you think they're, so all of these things are just pulling you into that moment, into the present. And I'd follow those. I would, you really have to be very patient. You have to oftentimes sit and wait for them to appear, which for me, that's probably the hardest part. It's just being a patient.
I'm sure no listener has ever struggled with patience when you're sitting before. Yeah.
Yeah. That was really tough for me, is just realizing that this isn't about me. This is about them. And if they allow me to see them, then that's wonderful. But I have to sit and wait and let that happen. So a lot of times, like I said, I would go to where I knew they like to spend time, and I would just sit and wait. And sure enough, many times they would come and fly up towards me and land on a branch near me and just sit there and let me watch them. And so that was really special. You really have to get used to being quiet and listening. That's a big clue too, is listening for their squawking. When they're babies, they just squawk. And so listening for that sound and listening. One of my big clues is to listen for magpies, because a lot of birds in the crow family don't like owls, and so magpies and crows will just squawk, squawk, squawk if there's an owl nearby.
The corvids make a lot of noise when the owls are nearby.
Exactly. So every time I hear that, I would think, oh, okay, there must be an owl nearby, and then you also are learning to discern like the silhouette of the owl for me against a juniper tree, which is really hard to spot. And that's how they were designed. But again, like you have to be so present in the moment. And so I kept doing that and realizing this was always happening in the summertime, because they're, usually nesting in the winter, and it's a lot harder to find them. And I usually don't like to disturb them in the winter for that reason. So because I was running the conservation corps, it was a wonderful job, but very, very stressful. And so I would notice that being out there was helping me so much to put that aside, because otherwise I would be thinking about that all weekend long about, oh my gosh, we have another deadline. What am I going to do on Monday? And so all of those experiences really helped me calm down and be very hyper-focused about just where I was in that moment and letting everything else go. So it was just such an amazing lesson over the course of the last couple of summers to advanced course mindfulness.
Well, it's mindfulness in the world. And this is one of the interesting things about how mindfulness can show up in a number of ways. Of course, there's that formal time on the cushion where we're focusing on the breath or open awareness or a body scan or whatever kind of practice we might be doing at that moment. And also it's, how does this show up off the cushion and the rest of the time? And this is one of these active modes in which we're conscious, aware, really openly receiving what's here and listening closely, even in the silence. This is one of the things I will often tell students is you can listen when there's no sound. And this is a matter of attention. And you can do it with more than just your ears.
Yeah.
And you've been doing that with owls, which is a unique experience from setting up a feeder, as you described, and watching the chickadees and the other birds come in with binoculars and getting a close look. That's delightful. I love doing that too. But watching something out in the woods, and as you said, a species-specific observation, in particular, we're going for something that it's a predatory bird. So it's not looking around for seed, whatever you're doing. It's on the hunt itself. And it is designed to blend in with its surroundings. So often is nearly indistinguishable from the trees in which they might be roosting or just hanging out for a few minutes. And you mentioned just the silhouette sometimes is a nice way to help identify them. Great horned owls with their tufts is very different from other kinds of birds. And I know that great horned owls are also fairly territorial. Here in Massachusetts, in other places, they'll chase off barred owls. Although I sometimes hear, some weeks we'll have some barred owls in territory. Some weeks we'll have great horned owls in territory. I'm wondering what it's been like for you in your listening during nighttime. Have they been active in calling to each other, particularly a mated pair?
Yes, I don't get to hear it a whole lot because, like I said, this is at my mom's ranch. And so it's only every now and then when I go over there and spend the night that I can hear them outside. And the best times, like, for example, I was there in October, and that's just as they're starting to pair up. And so I heard them. I hadn't heard them for quite a while, I think, or as far as I know, based on what my mother has said. Like I said, I wasn't there the whole time, but it was really exciting that one night that I was there in October because I could hear them doing the back and forth. And you can hear, I can never tell like which one is the male and which one is the female unless I can see them sitting together, and you can see that the male is that smaller one. But it's harder to tell for me. It's still harder to tell when they're separate or even just hearing them. But I could tell for just spatially speaking, and also like the tone and the pitches. It was two different owls, and one would call and then the other would mimic it, and they'd go back and forth, and it was just the sweetest thing. I loved it.
Yeah, it is. So what are some of your favorite things about owls and watching them?
One of the things that I love the most is their eyes. With the great horned owls, they're such a brilliant yellow eye, and they're so unbelievably observant. They have to be. They're predators, of course. So, they're always listening and watching. And for me, every experience that I really remember the most has been that eye contact that I've made with them, knowing that they're looking at me. And I also feel like over time, because I've had the privilege of visiting the same ones again and again, I really feel like they recognize you at some point and stop seeing you as if you've been very careful like I've been and not been too aggressive or, flashy or scared them off. They kind of come to trust you. And I feel like that's why so often they've let me sit and observe them for half an hour or even an hour at a time. Even when I'm moving around, sometimes I would start picking berries while I was watching them and they would let me and not fly away. That sense of making that connection with them through eye contact has been amazing to me. And also they're just those beautiful eyes. I also love watching the familial relationships that they have and learning more about that through observation rather than just what I've read. And just seeing the way that the parents are with their kids has been so sweet. I remember that first year, the first baby out of the nest had fallen off a fence one day, and the mom sat on top of the fence over her for probably 6 hours. I kept walking by the window and checking. 6 hours she sat there guarding that baby until the baby could get up and fly away again. And it was just so sweet. And you just think about, I know maybe it's not as sentimental, maybe it's just survival instinct, but still there's just a real sweetness to that to me, that they would dedicate that much time to ensure their baby's survival. I think it's
well, and that's an important part, is that how you respond to it as a person is what is meaningful to you. It doesn't necessarily mean that is the most accurate reflection of what the role is in the natural world and all of that. But how it is meaningful to you still influences how you are and how you meet those moments.
Oh, yeah, definitely.
So what would you like to share with listeners who might be curious about, okay, how would I do owl watching practice, this mindfulness? What would you recommend to people to start?
Oh, gosh, I've got a lot. Okay. I actually did a whole series of this on YouTube.
Great.
So first of all, if you're interested in it, ask around. There are so many places. There's owls everywhere in this country. They, might not be great horned. You might have a bunch of, great grays or the barred owls or anything. So Ask around is the first thing I would say. There's somebody that you know or someone that they know that will have seen an owl somewhere and can point you in the right direction. And there's so many places. I know a lot of people feel intimidated about, well, where do I go? You found it on your mom's ranch, but where do I go? State parks, national forests, they're everywhere. And I think this is something that I learned while working at the Conservation Corps, that a lot of people don't realize the public land that's surrounding them. There's so much of it, and so many of us forget that it's there. So there's a ton of opportunities there, or even just on hiking trails. And now as urbanization is growing, like you were mentioning, you'll see an owl like right there on the city limits. And I see them out here in my backyard sometimes. And it's a rural town, but still. So someone will be able to point you in the right direction. And then I would say, don't have a lot of expectations about it. Just go out there with a sense of curiosity, and try not to worry about all the things that you have to wear or bring or whatever. Just bring binoculars. One thing I do suggest is to not wear a lot of like hats and wide brims and stuff like that, or sunglasses, just because for me, I feel like it obstructs your view a little bit, but also because I feel like I want to present myself in my like true silhouette to an owl, so they kind of, because I know they've seen other humans, and you want them to kind of recognize that and not go, whoa, what is that big thing on her head? Yeah. So other than that, though, just not to be worried about, what you should or shouldn't do. Just go out there, be curious, go slow, be careful, be quiet, learn to look for things. And this is really where that mindfulness and patience comes in. You really have to wait. You have to look, listen. It might be a good idea to just sit down and think, not even think, I should say, really just connect with the world around you in that moment and let it speak to you. I always say this is also a good practice for developing your intuition, because there's so many times when I've done that and kind of dropped in and listened. You could go like any direction. Where do I go? And I'll always get this hit of, I think I should go over that way. And sure enough, there will be an owl right there, And so I feel like if you just get patient, listen to yourself, listen to the land around you, you'll know where to go, what to do. And as you practice it more and more, you'll get more familiar with what you're looking at, what you're looking for, and then you'll see it. You'll start to see the owls more, and it'll get you all excited to go out and try again.
Great. Well, our guest today, Yancy Lael, thank you for being here. And for folks listening, we'll put a couple links on the episode page for this episode as well for you to follow up on. Thank you, Yancy. Good speaking with you.
You too. Thank you so much.
Thanks for listening. If you'd like to learn more about something you've heard in today's podcast, please come visit the website at presentmomentmindfulness.com. You'll find an entire webpage devoted to this and every episode. You can comment on the episode page and find show notes and other helpful resources for your mindfulness practice. The shakuhachi music heard on Present Moment is used by permission and through the generosity of musician Rodrigo Rodriguez. His website is linked on the Present Moment website on the About Podcast Music page. Sound editing, mixing, and mastering provided by the generosity of Anthony Dominello of StructureFromSound.com. Until next time, remember, every moment you have a choice. Make it the best you can. See you next time on Present Moment.